Hello friends, Anderson here. Welcome back to Kill 10 Rats Plays Ironsworn, Chapter 2, Episode 21. We are facing a challenge in this one because we are playing as Saskia for a change. For the first time, actually, a little very special episode protagonist switch, as we are about to confront the nightmare. The father of nightmares, to be exact, Arsula, our main antagonist. And Kynan's already made his way through the scene challenge that is the embodiment of this nightmare, and Saskia, who is by his side, has to do the same, which will give us an opportunity to learn a little bit more about her. And if all goes well, this might be a precedent for the future, because I would very much like to somewhat diversify the portfolio of main actors we have for the series. Because Kynan as a standalone for all eternity is a possibility, but not my preferred one. So I would like to take them as they come, as the dice present them to us. And Saskia is a prime example of a character that came out of nowhere and just turned into something completely unexpected. And I think we're just going to take that the logical next step. And we're going to do some character building here. I'm gonna make this a very Saskia-centric episode, so we will play this scene challenge to its full extent. We will learn as much as we can about her, and then we hopefully make it through to the other side, and we will be able to confront the elves and take care of Arsula and all of that. But that will then very likely be in the next episode, unless we get through this unexpectedly quickly. You may have noticed there was a bit of a gap in the upload schedule, and part of the reason for that is all of this business here. I have rearranged some things, got a new microphone, and I hope everything works. My cameras are a little low. That's also part of the reason why I want to get cracking and keep the episode as tight as I can, because I feel like I'm about to run out of battery. So we'll see how far we get, but hopefully we'll get to the point where we have understood more about how Saskia became Saskia, and made it through to the end of facing her personal nightmare. So let's get on with it, shall we? We rewind the clock a little bit to that point in time where Kynan took his step forward and smelled that sea breeze and heard the sounds of his home village of bleak frost that he hadn't heard in decades. And at the same time as he has that experience, so does Saskia, as she sets foot closer towards the hanging shape of Arsula, shield strapped to her arm, spear in hand. She also gets some reminiscent scents and sounds that are so evocative of memory, and we need to find out what memory we are dealing with here. So, what we know about Saskia is that she is from a place called Kasupatma. That's something we decided in one of the prior episodes. And that Kasupatma is named after some old world concept. And we also determined that Shona and Saskia were part of a loyalist faction that were loyal to the rulers of, or the ruler of Kasupatma before they were ousted. They, as in the ruler, and in turn also Saskia and Shona. And the reason for the ousting was Kaladas, even though up there where Saskia is from, he goes by the Prophet in White. He is a counseling figure, a religious figure who is said to be an apostle of the Pathfinder, and he is very close to this Nemesis king, the trying to be unifier Viggo of Summersong, who is currently aggressively trying to subdue the Havens and the Hinterlands. And in some way, shape or form, Kaladas convinced the ruling families of Kasupatma to give up, which is something the ruler didn't want to do, and which is what Saskia and Shona sided with. And then the ruling families, trying to avoid bloodshed with Viggo of Summersong, deposed the ruler and opened the gates for Viggo, leading to Kasupatma being taken over somewhat bloodlessly, although we assume that it probably didn't go very well for the previous ruler. We can assume that since life is sort of a precious commodity in the Ironlands, I think banishment is always preferred. So Saskia and Shona were banished alongside probably a bunch of other people. So we can assume that when we meet Saskia's worst memories, especially the parts that make her turn into this bandit leader that we eventually met, this all happened right after, or started to happen right after this ousting from Kazupatma, because when Shona and her were there, they were still what constitutes sort of an honorable housecarl kind of person. And in some ways, Shona doesn't seem to ever really have lost that. She just focused it on Saskia. But Saskia clearly became somebody who was looking for a way to never become victimized anymore. When we roll her up, I dug out the old notes, and we found she wanted to enrich herself, and that we took to mean, in hindsight, that it isn't just greed that made her want to enrich herself, it's more of wanting to have commodity of power to create some kind of protective layer around her that allows her to never be a victim again and never be on the receiving end of power, but she wants to be the one holding the power, and that's why she took over eventual leadership of this bandit clan, why she compromised on so many of her honor concepts, which, again, probably still alive in her, but on a lower rung of priority. And I'm not sure if she's actually heading for a redemption arc here. I've left the background vow intentionally vague for the moment. I've only given her like the mechanical minimum we need to pursue a character arc for her, but I think it's not unlikely that she's at least now on a trajectory upwards from her lowest point, which happened when Shona became the successor of Etana, and when they caused all that chaos in the fishing village. So whatever now happens probably between that starting point of getting expelled from Kazupatma and being picked up into the company of Kynan somehow, or rather inserting herself into the company of Kynan. It was very much Saskia's agency that drove her in that direction, not Kynan recruiting her in some way. So that's where we need to base ourselves off with our Oracle prompt. So I think what we should probably be doing is to give ourselves an action and theme cornerstone just to figure out what kind of a scene we're dealing with that explains, maybe also gives us a first hint on how Saskia went from Honorable Housecarl to, well, effectively ruthless bandit. 31 is uncover. 15 secret. Uncover secret. So we're shaping the view on this through our expectation that whatever this secret uncovery is has something to do with how Saskia, well, I wouldn't say lost her honor, but at least took a step towards compromising her original ideals. And I'm trying to think of a kind of a situation that would even push for, let's say, an extreme reaction. And if I think about the circumstances of Kazupatma's fall, taken over by the forces of Vigo, and then being ousted after watching the execution probably of the closest leadership circle that Shona and Saskia both served, maybe we can make that scenario happen sort of on the cusp of winter and have this refugee train that Shona and Saskia, as probably the most competent warriors, were in charge of, be composed of maybe also people that aren't exactly made for this, because we assume that probably there are some, well, the extended family of the old leadership, probably the sister, brother, some kind of ruling families that were allied to the old leadership. So the core of the loyalists, and they're not exactly used to trekking into winter through the Ironlands, and they're probably also not very well provisioned. So the extremity that I'm picturing is that there is sort of a refugee caravan that Saskia and Shona are in charge of. that is made up of people that aren't necessarily made for this kind of life, and maybe at the point where we have this scene in this exaggerated nightmarish fashion play out, they've already lost some of the more elderly and maybe even some of the youngest of their trek a few weeks in. They probably started out with just the bare minimum of provisions, since we expect that the people that were ousting them weren't exactly generous. And so that's the extremity. The refugee caravan is on the cusp of starving and freezing to death. And there is a secret now going on that Saskia, as one of the leaders, is trying to uncover. And I'm thinking maybe that has something to do with almost like human nature, like something that you can't really fault anyone for, but that's still kind of a horrible thing to do. So let's say as they progress from day to day, every now and again, provisions that are now being rationed are going missing. Where maybe we can picture it this way, that every time that Saskia pulls the night watch, some of her food goes missing from her tent, presumably resting in fur tent or something. And that's what she's trying to uncover. And due to this extremity and due to all of these circumstances, the pressure, maybe that makes her act dishonorably, overreact as she uncovers the secret. Maybe there's even a misunderstanding at play. And we also need to remember that the scene that we are about to zoom in on will not exactly be as it happened, because it'll be the nightmare version that Ursula is constructing to break her spirit, to guilt trip her even more than the actual situation would allow for. So we'll probably introduce some elements in there that also don't make the most sense. But I think with all of this rundown of what secret she might be uncovering, practically speaking, in her current situation as an outcast, I have some meat to pack on the bone of a scene. Saskia is crouched behind the trunk of a fir tree, peeking through the evergreen branches, trying not to have her teeth chatter as she's up to her knees in deep snow, looking out at the row of tents that they have aligned in a sort of a windbreak of a hillside, and they are making camp for the night. It's already beyond nightfall, and Saskia is ostensibly on night's watch, but she has arranged it with Shona to have Shona take her watch, wearing her helmet and her cloak. They've swapped the outer layers of their clothing. Shona is pretending to be Saskia, making circles around the camp, while Saskia is hiding, watching her own tent at the farthest outer perimeter of the row of camped tents, and just trying to keep an intent watch on who will now show up and try to rummage through her belongings. And she has this anticipatory, seething anger already boiling in her, because she is hungry, she is overtired, she's weary from this responsibility that she didn't really want. She's always been more of a follower than a leader in these circumstances, although at this point she realizes that going forward, she will never want to be the one who is subjected to the vagaries of others. She wants to be the one that has the power. And as she's running through these thoughts in her mind, she watches her tent, and she watches as a figure slowly creeps around the back of the tent row from shadow to shadow. And she's fairly certain that she's about to catch her thief in her party of maybe 2.5 dozen people made up of families, family members of old ruling clans that have now come to nothing, aren't used to dealing with this, and she wants to see who is the one that is here trying to benefit and take more than their share from the meager pickings that they have, setting traps, and maybe from that one boar they brought down a week and a half ago, but where everything is sort of packaged and parceled out. And she's also acutely aware of already having lost some of the people in her charge. So she's not happy. As she sees that figure coming through the row of tents, she has that clenching of her jaw and just tightens her grip around the spear. And it is, as she assumed, this figure who she is too far away and it's too dark to recognize immediately who it is, creeps towards her tent and, after making sure that it's unoccupied, leans into it and starts manipulating the things inside there. At which point Saskia starts slowly creeping forward, spear raised up, and having that mental image of just bringing the spear down into the back of the person unawares, just dealing with it and setting a strong example as her first ideas of how to execute her own specific form of leadership starts forming. But she doesn't act on the impulse. She gets close, grabs the person, spins her around, and it is a youngish woman, one of the nieces of the old clan leader. And it is to Saskia's rising rage, it is someone who is not frail, who is not starving, who is actually looking quite healthy and well put together, who is young enough to easily survive this trek, who is also somewhat of a budding shield maiden, who is training regularly, at least back in the village she was, and who probably wouldn't need to do this. And as she holds out her hand and eyes widening in shock, blurting out the words, "Hold, it's not as it seems," Saskia already brings down the spear, just rage moving her arm more than anything. And immediately the eyes widen even more and blood starts running out of the mouth and the person goes limp. And we roll a face danger to see how Saskia deals with this and what the actual repercussion of this is in this nightmare scenario. So is she facing this memory well, or will it twist into something that hurts her spirit in some way? Let's face danger. Facing it with wits, I would say, since it is somewhat of a challenge to unravel what is actually going on here. We make it a dangerous scene challenge like with Kynan, and we call it Escape the Nightmare, and we give it a 4 countdown track as usual. So we get our first 2 progress from a strong hit here, as she reconciles her action with what actually happened. So this, as far as her memory is concerned, she feels instantly bad about this, and she understands that in hindsight this has been a mistake, and she also becomes aware at this moment in her dream state that she is thinking in terms of in hindsight. So while she's in that moment and has just unleashed the spear, she realizes, wait, how am I having an assessment of this that is so detached, almost like it's years later, where I am almost forgiving myself for this? How is it possible? Because it just happened, and that first crack in the entrapment of the nightmare is showing. So let's see what else we flash on. Let's roll face danger again, just to move it along a little bit and see what else happens. Okay, there's a weak hit, so we move it up 2 more, but we also incur one of the countdown ticks, which means that we don't have to pay the price in the framework of the scene challenge, but we do have a factor that will either confuse or complicate things for Saskia and pull her deeper into the nightmare, maybe assault her with some other negative emotion that's trying to break her spirit. Maybe also mix up some elements of her past in an order that doesn't chronologically quite make sense. Let me think about this quickly. So as she's crouched there looking at the dying figure in front of her and congratulating herself that she's found the thief, and at the same time dealing with her overreaction to this, she hears the approach of footsteps behind her, and she knows in advance, in hindsight, in that weird deja vu feeling that she has as she is engaging with this nightmare of memory. She knows that this is Shona coming to check, because she's been close on her patrol through the perimeter, and she's heard the scuffle, the commotion, because in these snow-covered hills, sound carries quite far. And she turns around expecting to see Shona, and doesn't. "Do you ever think before you act, woman?" And she's very confused to behold these features of a southern fisherman, and she flashes on the name Bastion and Stone Ridge from her future and tries to work out how this is possible. That's reflecting the success of the roll, because she has another little crack form, so there is this figure now showing up that makes no sense to be here. And she looks down again, and she looks at the scene in front of her, and she sees that the hand that is trying to... Well, rather, she looks at the scene where the way the body is placed in front of her, and where and what she was rummaging through in her tent, and she realizes that the thief, the intruder, hadn't really taken anything from her tent. And it looks more like, now that she examines the things that have fallen to the ground, the little wrapped pieces of ration and food, they're not hers. They are not the ration that she'd set aside for after her watch as bait. So she's confused and just stares over her shoulder at Bastion, who still has no right to be here. "You see it now, don't you? She was giving you food, not taking it from you." And Saskia again has this jolt of memory where she realizes and hears it in Shona's voice now, as that's what actually happened in this basis that this scene is now replaying. She understands that the person she's just stabbed isn't the thief, but was covering for the thief, had found one of her family members, had been taking rations, tried to make it all good again, not by openly addressing it, but by just sneaking back and putting it back, and got herself rashly executed for her trouble. At which point something again bricks inside of Saskia. Some irrevocable damage done to her sense of honor, and she struggles in that moment with this sense of self-righteousness, of trying to somehow justify that this was still the right thing to do, that this doesn't really make her the bad person in this. And yeah, that was the first step along her journey. She acted rashly on a misunderstanding, killing the wrong person who was just trying to fix things and make amends again. I think we roll another Oracle prompt to see what other seeds we can flesh on here. 70 command. 49 hate. Command hate. The commanding aspect makes me think that this maybe has something to do with the way that Saskia became the leader of that bandit salvager clan down on the south coast near Stone Ridge that ended up attacking the village. And hate makes me think that, especially looking at her stat array, she's not the most overthinking person in the world. I would put that one wits down to her often acting before she thinks, because that is a character trait that we've seen her express a few times. But the heart, the ability to read people and play with people's emotions, that is quite pronounced, especially since she's also, with a high shadow score, able to manipulate and use people. So the combination of heart and shadow makes me think that she's set up the takeover in a way where she, maybe drawing from that experience, she has planted the insinuation in a lot of the people in that war band that Shona and her joined after being expelled from the refugee train, after murdering, in the eyes of the others, the woman that was innocent. And that Saskia has planted this idea that the current chief that she wants to depose has been skimming off the top and not giving everybody their fair share, that whenever they go north to make deals with the salvage they found and to, well, effectively also get coin for the people they capture, either by ransoming them or by selling them into indentured servitude, that this current chief has been skimming off the top and has been hiding some treasure somewhere. And she's kept her head well out of the line of fire up until the moment when it's right to strike. And maybe that's the moment where we have another nightmarish memory, because that's another part where she did things in a way that she maybe wouldn't have done before. Perhaps old Saskia would have just drawn the circle and called out the chief, but new Saskia realizes that there is a certain risk attached, and she's maybe not even afraid to involve the ones that she holds dearest, because we also assume that her closest relationship that she's ever had is with Shona. And maybe this command hate, taking over the command through hatred, culminates in rallying the rebellious ones, the majority of this clan, and confronting the previous leader, trying to depose them. And they've got a final ace up their sleeve, because they have this hulking lieutenant bodyguard that they now send forth to do a trial by combat, knowing full well, at least in the scope of the experience so far, that no one can stand against this hulking brute. And now Saskia is on the back foot a little bit, knowing or anticipating that this would happen, and she's compromising parts of her honor again. So let's maybe face danger to see how it goes for her, and then we'll take it from there. That's another weak hit, which means we lose another countdown and we gain another 2 progress, putting us up to 6. And I think one thing that we can already assume is that Saskia has prepared for this and seen this eventuality coming. She's not much of a planner, but she has that gut instinct of how to manipulate situations to her advantage. And she can put 2 and 2 together, and she knows that the only thing that the current chief can do to defend against the accusation is to do a trial by combat, to draw the circle. But she also knows that the chief is generally not the most physical and is more of a negotiator, and so she's anticipated that this brute would stand as a champion, and she's laced his food with something that she's acquired and makes him more sluggish and makes him more slow. But she's also relying on Shona here to act as her own champion, because she doesn't want to risk her own neck. She's become, at this point, that selfish that she doesn't want to stand in front and take that chance. So she's perfectly willing in that moment to sacrifice Shona's well-being, and she also knows that Shona is sworn to her that she will always pretty much do what she says, and that relationship that started off on a very honorable basis in Kazupatma over the course of the trek through the wintry Ironlands and being shed of everything that tied them to their old identities, has slowly warped into more of a master and servant kind of relationship that we also saw play out in chapter 1, where Saskia was almost amused to throw Shona to join alongside Kynan, and had started treating her rather badly, which wasn't how things started. But she still cares for her. She just has this dissonance between how she acts and how she really feels, because she doesn't allow herself to act on these impulses anymore that have made her so weak in the past, these loyalties and attachments that she no longer believes in. So we see Shona step into the circle against the brute, and the brute coming forward, sort of shaking his head and roaring and just barreling towards Shona. And that's where the memory again diverges somewhat from the reality of things, because as the brute throws the head back and roars, it's very obvious that the brute is dead, that Saskia's poison has killed him, but he's still alive. He's undead, and Shona has no chance of beating this monstrosity now. And Saskia realizes that she is in that moment more terrified that her schemes go wrong rather than Shona getting hurt. And that realization just hits her, and she struggles again with reconciling that impulse with the person that she thought herself to be or knew herself to be for most of her life. But she always engages with that compromise of being fixated on that one goal to attain power and become unassailable at any cost. And she now tries to work out how can we still turn the situation to our advantage. So we'll face danger again. That is a miss this time around, putting us at 3 countdown progress, and I think that tells me that in the scene that's playing out in front of Saskia, things go completely different from what she anticipates, remembers, just struggles with trying to understand how she has such a firm expectation of how this fight is supposed to go, and then it goes completely the wrong way. As Shona flies back into the rows of salvagers, like these ragtag bandits behind her forming the circle and just pushing her back, and the knee of the brute comes up and knocks Shona's head back, and just she's on the ground. The brute is standing and just launches himself on top of her and just pummels her face, and these strikes and crunches and just this sickening sound just makes Saskia lose some spirit. So we'll deduct 2 spirit and we will endure stress. Okay, do I want to sacrifice momentum here because that's a strong hit? I think I'm gonna actually take a momentum here based on the back of that, because we only have +2 and it's probably gonna come in quite handy. We'll leave the spirit, deduct it, and she, in the moment of the nightmare, embraces that keen edge of terror to generate like 100 ideas per second on how to somehow get out of the situation, to manipulate it to her advantage. And I think that may be where she gives up on honor completely. Maybe this is even an exaggerated version how it went, in fact, where the fight did go badly for Shona, even though Saskia did everything to skew the odds in their favor, but this Hulk was just too much of a force to be reckoned with, and Saskia does something that probably to her original self was unthinkable, and creeps round the back towards where the current chief is overlooking the battle with a pleased expression and surrounded by his followers and loyalists. And she takes out her dagger and, just ignoring the circle, ignoring everything, just goes for a Hail Mary and tries to assassinate him. So let's face danger again. Okay, that could have gone horribly wrong because we're already at 3 countdown, but we get our strong hit. Not the most likely outcome, but I was kind of also actually prepared to try and figure out what happens if we lose the scene challenge, because I have no idea. We could still lose it, we haven't won it yet, we just made 8 progress, which makes it more likely that we'll win. But we then also flash on that scene where everyone's attention is just grabbed by the horrendous beating that Shona is taking, her nose crunching, teeth being knocked out, orbital bone fracturing, just this elbow raining down on her, and the brute now almost toying with her, and the loyalists leaning forward, jeering and yelling, and everyone's attention being captured until the time-slowing moment where the somewhat plump leader of the band topples forward into the ring, blood gushing from a grotesquely large neck wound. And Saskia standing there, raising her dagger, screaming, "Kill them all!" and launching herself at the brute, just raining stabs on his back as all hell breaks loose. Her own loyalists somehow under her spell, just taking that leap with her over the edge into complete dishonor and just falling on their former comrades and hacking them to pieces. And that's how Saskia becomes the leader of this clan. I think we can try and end the scene challenge here. I definitely don't want to do another face danger roll because that is way too risky. So let's roll for it. Everything above 7 isn't good news. Anything 7 or below is a success. That's 2 below 7, so a strong hit on that one, which means that also Saskia manages to shake off the attempts of Arsula to drag her into guilt and self-loathing. She does feel that sense of revulsion at her past actions, but it's more of an impetus to maybe now do some good for once, and she takes another step forward and she sees that scene unfold before her, now back in the actual events that are transpiring, with Kynan to her side, with the Varu walking next to her, and those 3 elves coming forward, masks impassive. Asha somehow still in the back. Is she moving? Is she starting to stir awake now? Well, that's what we're gonna see next time. So thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you then, and bye for now.